So maybe we'll go ahead and get started. I'll do a quick introduction. So my name is Jessica Cohn. I direct the KL2 program along with Krista Metz and Jason Blackard. This is our K Club, which is directed towards junior investigators in our institutions. We're really excited to have Dr. Amy Shah as our speaker today. And a very hot topic, the K to R transition. Dr. Shah is an associate professor, though soon to be promoted, in endocrinology. Her research interests are in type 2 diabetes and obesity and lipid disorders, and she has been extraordinarily successful in transitioning from her KL2 to multiple R01s. So we're super proud of her in our institution, and she's a wonderful, wonderful speaker. So we're very excited about her talk. She's going to be speaking today, and then I think leaving some time for questions and answers at the end. And then after the talk, Krista Metz will send out a form for all of you so you can give your comments. We really, really appreciate your comments on our talks. It really helps us to plan for our future K Club seminars. So please do complete that survey after the talk when Krista sends it out, and the talk will be recorded just so you're aware, and it gets posted on the CCTST website. So without further ado, it is a great pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Shah.
Thanks, Jessica, for the invitation. I hope you guys can hear me, and hopefully if anything is unclear or something's not working well, Krista, please just let me know, because once I put it into share mode, it's kind of hard to see people. So let me do that. So hopefully you guys can see this, and you can see my slides. Okay, great. So Jessica asked me to speak on executing the successful transition from K to R. So I'll just tell you, by no means am I an expert on this. I just happen to have done this. And so I'm just going to try to share my experience with you guys and give you some helpful tips and tricks I kind of learned along the way. So when I told my kids and my husband I was doing this talk today, you know, they kind of laughed, and my daughter just said, well, you know how you go from a K to an R is you just wrap a bubble around the top of the K. And I said, well, I wish it was that easy, but I thought that was kind of cute because they've all been there for this transition along the way. So I thought I would just tell you kind of a little bit about myself and help frame kind of where I was coming from. So as Jessica said, I'm currently an associate professor in the Division of Endocrinology at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Important to know, I had never done any research, not one single thing prior to joining my fellowship at Cincinnati Children's Hospital in 2011. I do clinical research and as well as translational research focused on early cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. And that's what I did during my fellowship and expanded that. I stayed on for a fourth year to complete the master's in clinical and translational research, again, because I had very little research experience and wanted to make sure that I at least understood the fundamentals. Now I have both a basic science lab and a clinical research program. So right now I'm actually located at one of the UC campuses where my basic science lab is, and the rest of the time I spend on the Cincinnati Children's campus. I'm also the director of the Adolescent Type 2 Diabetes Program at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And I'm also a wife and a mother to two girls. And I enjoy spending my time outside of work. So I only say that only because it's important to keep all of this in reference. As I know, this was a very big transition from, you know, K to R, and just keeping perspective of things outside of maybe work. So I thought I would start with just like a timeline of how things worked, because I got a few questions about when to start thinking about an R and how did it all work. And I want to share this timeline because it's not the typical timeline, and it wasn't necessarily how I wanted things to go, but in the end it kind of worked out. So I think it also highlights some of the things we'll be talking about over the course of the next 30 minutes. And I did try to leave a lot of time so we can talk, and if you guys have questions, I can address those as well. So I was hired on as faculty after doing my fellowship, as I said, at Cincinnati Children's in 2011. That first year to year, you know, after I was hired, I both wrote like essentially a proctor, which is kind of like a KL2. It's an institutional award. And at the same time, I started thinking about the K-23. I submitted it in 2013, and luckily the proctor was awarded, but my K-23 actually went not discussed. So I was given some time to, revise it, and luckily the proctor scholarship was kind of like one of the K programs where I had some protected time. So I revised it, and then in 2014 my K-23 started. That was a basic science K-23, so I had done a little bit of clinical research during my fellowship and really wanted to start expanding that a little bit more. So it was kind of, even though it wasn't a K-08, it was more of a translational project, and so it included lab work, but it fell under the K-23 because we were doing human subject research. At the same time that I was doing this, and people kind of always ask, were you just doing your K-23 work? I actually started doing a little bit of clinical research on the side, and had a small pilot project that focused on brain and cognitive function in adolescents with type 2 diabetes. And when I say small, it was really a pilot study. Nobody had really started looking at potential impacts of type 2 diabetes on the brain in kids. And we recruited 20 participants for the study. So it was, again, very, very small. So here came the K-23, and I was working on it, and I started to think, well, I don't have enough preliminary data to write an R1 on my K-23, but we finished doing the pilot study on the brain in adolescents. And so what I did was I wrote my first R1 that was focused on the brain, and that was in the 3rd year of my K award. And what you can see is it went not discussed. So again, what I did was I resubmitted that. Still, it was in the later part of the 3rd year, and it was scored, but it wasn't funded. So then I kind of said, okay, I need to put that away because I really need to, try to get this K-23 work funded. So, but I still was interested in the stuff on the brain. So I said, okay, let me look at the critiques that I got. And one of the largest critiques was we didn't have the right control group, or at least in the study section's mind. So I wrote a shared discovery award, which allowed me to get brain imaging on a control group. So that was a small award, an internal award through Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And we continued that work on the brain, but it was actually led by one of the fellows with me as a mentor. So that gave me an opportunity in my 4th year of my K-23 to take the basic science work and try to write the R1. And what you can see is it wasn't funded. And then I resubmitted it in my 4th year, and again, it wasn't funded. And this is when I went to my division director and I said, I don't even know if I should be doing this anymore. I don't think this is the right career path. I wrote for R1s. This is like so not a good idea. Should I still be doing this? And he convinced me that no, I should still be doing this, and that, this path is not easy, but continue on. So I said, okay, fine. So then in my 5th year of the K, well, I was, thinking about how am I going to rework this R1 that hasn't been funded. I was presented with the opportunity to be a multiple PI on a clinical trial focused on type 2 diabetes. So this
Amy, is it okay to interrupt?
Of course.
Okay, I just thought you were offering questions, so I thought I'd take you up on it. So the basic science projects, was that very distinct from the brain projects that you were talking about?
Yes, so the basic science stuff was focused on lipids, and the brain stuff was focused on the brain in adolescents with type 2 diabetes. So they were related in the sense that the human populations were the same. So the basic science one was focused on lipids and lipoproteins in the setting of type 2 diabetes, but the brain project was a clinical project. So then I was approached by Dr. Helmerath, who's one of our bariatric surgeons in my 5th year of my K, and he said, we're actually going to do a multi-center study looking at treatments of adolescents with type 2 diabetes. So the impact of bariatric surgery versus aggressive medical treatment, and we want you to be part of it. So this was a big decision, and we'll come back to this, because what it did was it meant if I was a multi-PI, I would no longer have my early stage investigator status. And again, we'll talk about that. But I knew it was going to be a potentially great opportunity. So I said, okay, maybe after talking to some people, I said, maybe let's take the risk and do this. But as you can see, that first submission went not discussed. We submitted it back in 2019. So this is my 5th year of my K. And then, oh, luckily it was funded. So I took a little bit of sigh of relief and I said, okay, this is great. I'm super excited. But now what do I do with my basic science lab and everything else that's going on? So then, because the R01 was scored and not funded, I actually wrote a gap award. So that's a 1-year kind of award to it's like bridge funding while you can reapply. So I wrote that to support my lab, to keep the employees that I had in my lab and to potentially keep the work going. And what I did was I took a completely different direction on the R01. And then the other thing I did was we did a multi-PI R01 when we went back in. And we'll talk again a little bit about all of these things through this talk. And then that was funded. So then my basic science lab was funded. And then this past year, we basically had enough work on the brain project that we had done before. And because of that shared discovery award and the controls that we were able to get from that study, we actually wrote the brain R01, and that work was also funded. So you can see, if you count, the hits versus the misses on this, there's always going to be more misses, but I think this does bring up a few things that I wanted to talk about, and we'll talk about this as we go through this talk, but it's really about the timelines, the potential for side projects or collaborative work, alternate funding mechanisms that could be internal, the role of multi-PI applications, and then also this discussion of giving up your ESI status in the NIH size. So that's what I was going to talk a little bit today about the current funding rates, and I'll just go very quickly through that. The right time to apply, and as you can see, I don't know if I exactly know the right time to apply, but I know you got to keep applying. Things that you could be doing on your K that can help you to be successful. What are the main differences between the K and the R01, specifically in terms of the application and things to keep in mind? What I consider the key tips for now writing a successful R01 after doing it multiple times. Then this question about multiple PI applications or ESI status and leveraging institutional support. So I don't know if you guys have seen this, but this is from the NIH website, and this is basically showing the number of applications that they've gotten, that they get across all the years from 1998 to 2020. And the dark blue bars are the number of applications received. The lighter blue bars, I guess, are the applications that are funded, and then you can see the success rate. So, the success rate's about close to 20%. So I would say, expect that you're going to probably need to apply, more than once to get an R01 award. But I think with the current funding rates, they are improving a little bit, which hopefully will turn that, in the right direction. This is showing success rates by gender and the type of applications. So you can see that there's really no differences for at least when you look at new R01s, which are the blue lines at the very bottom by male or female sex. They're very similar, but you can see that it is a little bit harder, or the success rate is lower for your first application versus a renewal application. And this is just showing the differences between first-time R01 applicants and established PIs. And you can see that, again, it's a little bit lower. And I'll talk about a little bit about why I think, that is, and then also things to maybe tips and tricks to kind of help with that. So this is the timeline that the NIH actually has on their website. And this is, so you kind of know, so the years of your K are across the top. And if you were to write your first R01 and it would be perfect, you would start in your 4th year, and then in the 5th year it would be funded. So you could start on it exactly right after you finished your K award. A lot of times that doesn't happen. Some people are successful on doing that. And sometimes you need to revise and resubmit. So if you anticipate that you may need to revise and resubmit, then you actually need to start in your 3rd year. So that allows you to, in your 4th year, to revise it, by the 5th year, obtain funding, and then after you come off of a K award, to go right into an R01. However, if you are not successful at the submission or the revision, then what you can see is that in your 5th year, you go unfunded. That timeline, I wish, could have happened for me. And as I showed you guys, it's, it happened a little bit later if I look at the R01 research based on my K award. In fact, it actually happened in the 6th year, but I was lucky enough to get a gap award, which allowed me to continue that work. And so that was kind of my timeline. However, I did write an R01 based on another research idea, and that allowed me to be funded in that, coming out of that fifth year. So I think the timeline, while ideal, is shown in the top. Sometimes it may stray from the ideal in order to try to get funded. So what are the things that I think, after reviewing the comments from all these R01 applications and that weren't funded, what are the things that I thought that really helped? One is to make sure you execute on the K research. So I think if you say in your K award you're going to do something, it's super important that you try to do that. So you want to collect preliminary data. You want to really execute the research plan that you propose, because I think especially when you're trying to get that work funded or converted to an R, they do look at your productivity. The other thing is if there's opportunities to publish, do that while you are collecting data. So there are numerous ways and different types of publications that you can do while you're collecting data for your K. So one of the things I did was write some review articles. So a lot of times our mentors are invited to write invited reviews and things like that. I remember asking a lot of them, if you're ever invited to do an invited review, can I be part of it? Could I lead it? Could I be part of it? Could I have some role in it? So that's something definitely that you can do. If there's a study group that you're involved with, so I was involved with a couple of study groups focused on adolescents with type 2 diabetes. And so the data was already collected in those studies. And basically I was able to take already collected data and write a paper with a study group. So that's another option. If you have a clinical trial that you're doing for your K, there are papers that you can just write up the protocol, actually. So they're clinical trial protocol papers, and there are some journals that just accept those. So that's another thing you can do. If you have a primary outcome, but you're going to be following the cohort for 2 to 3 years, you could write that primary outcome paper after a year, if that's when the primary outcome is, or 6 months after. You could get involved with a side or a smaller project. So with the BRAIN project, even though we had just recruited 20 adolescents in a control group, we were able to publish a couple of papers just on that as a pilot study. So anything that you can do to kind of continue to publish while you're on a K award is a good idea. And the reason why is this is what goes into your R01 bio sketch. So you want to be able to show that you have been productive, not only on your K award, but in the area of research that you are pursuing. Somebody had asked a question previously, is it more important quality or quantity? That's a really hard question. I don't know what have a great answer for that, but I would say, of course, if you're able to, publish something in Nature or Cell or, New England Journal, yes, you probably only need one of those. Otherwise, if it's, smaller journals and things like that, I think you have to, kind of weigh the quality over the quantity. I think numbers do speak volumes though. So the more, you're able to do, if possible, without, again, distracting too much from the longer term goal is a good idea. Other things, one is to be open and collaborate on projects that might be related to your K. So I think, you know, again, without getting too distracted from the target or where you're going, if there are things that come up focused in the areas of research, it might be a good idea to collaborate on other things. So it also brings in the idea for new ideas. If you can expand on your K, because that could be a direction that you take your R1 project, that's always a good idea. As I said, stay open to new ideas. You never know where you may need to go. And I think one of the big things I learned was it's okay, even if you think you have a really good idea, to put that idea away and go in a completely different direction. Sometimes you need that. I used to keep a list of kind of different ideas that would come up. So after I had gone to talks, or when we had in-person meetings, after having conversations with people, after talking to my mentors or presenting my work, people would always throw out ideas. Did you ever think about this? Did you ever think about that? So I used to keep and I still actually do, keep a running list of ideas and thoughts because you can always go back to that, and that may help you think of what is the next best idea. I would say keep up with the literature. I use this feature in PubMed. I don't want new articles sent to me on a daily basis, but on a monthly basis. I actually have search terms in there, and they send me all articles related to, you know, type 2 diabetes and lipids in adolescents. So it allows me to keep up with the literature. I would say use your mentoring team during the K Award, not only for research, but really for career development and additional opportunities. They're the ones that are going to be able to bring you into study groups, help you find those review articles, really help you to pave the way. So I know we spend a lot of time developing that mentoring plan for the K Award, and I would say use that team not only to present your research, because I see a lot of the meetings are often focused on research, but try to allow some time for career development and additional opportunities that could potentially be new avenues for yourself. And don't forget to develop new mentors. As your research expands, it's always a good idea to find out if there's other people, you know, not only at Cincinnati Children's or UC, but across the country too, that could be a new mentor for you. And as you guys are doing here, develop peer networks. That's probably another really important point, especially when you want to get feedback or things like that on the work that you are doing. A couple of other things of what to do on the K. I hope you guys have all heard about this early career reviewer program through the NIH. So you can sign up to actually attend a NIH study section as an early career reviewer, and you usually get slotted as reviewer 2 or 3 on these grants, but it's an opportunity to review R01s. I think until you've actually reviewed an R01, it's hard to write an R01. So it's not only the opportunity to get examples of R01s, but to see what are the things that people are saying. You know, what did the reviewers really like about certain grants? What irritated reviewers? So tips and tricks to do and not do when you're actually meaning to write one. I was able to do this, I think, in the 4th year of my K Award. So it was after I had actually submitted that brain R01, but it was a very, I think, important and useful thing. And you can NIH website, and there's an opportunity to sign up, and the program officers will contact you if you're selected for it. I think you turn in a CV as well with the application. If you can, review for internal grants. We have so many programs at Children's and at UC to review, and that's again another good way to just kind of understand how to write these grants. There is a K to R transition workshop, which is essentially this talk expanded into about 8 hours with super helpful things. There's one for KOA trainees, and there's one for K23 trainees at the NIH. I don't know if they're doing them via Zoom now, but when I attended this, it was in person. So I would definitely, I know they still have them, but I would definitely look into that. Look at the NIH reporter periodically. Again, if you're especially picking a hot topic, you want to make sure not everybody's also studying that, because people may already be doing it. And then I would say the biggest thing is come up with a timeline for your R01 and then stick to it. So how is the R01 different from your K? And I think this is, you know, one of the things is super important. So the K, of course, is, you know, it was based on the candidate, which you guys were all successful at, so that's amazing. it's based on your mentoring team and your career development plan, and then 1/3 on the research. And the R01 is it's really dependent on the research. So it's a lot more heavier. And so the research has got to be solid. So again, it's focused mostly on the research project. And one of my mentors kind of gave me these two helpful hints. And I think it drives home the point. So he would always say to me, what you're looking at is the project worth doing, right? That's what the reviewers are grading on it. Is it significant? Is it innovative? Is it the next critical step that's needed? So is the project really worth doing? And if you can convince the reviewers that it is worth doing, you're going to get points in those areas. And then the second question to always ask is can this team do it? So does it have everything it needs in place to do the science? And that is based on the preliminary data, the team, any experts, consultants, anybody that you need. Do you have access to the patient population, or if it's a basic science project, the mice that you need, the resources, and then do you have the equipment, laboratory assays, and all of that? And later, it's how the team will do it. So really, your points are, is this project worth doing, and is this team the people to be able to execute on this project? So this is kind of, this comes from the NIH website, but again, it just highlights what are the differences that you're really, differences between the different types of awards and where the focus is. So the R01 is really focused on the research itself. And that's, I think, a huge important difference. The other big thing is the budget. And I don't think I realized this at the beginning, but it's important to do this early. So of course the science is important, but you will need to make sure that you can actually do the project. So it's a good idea to sit down and to try to do this. I have a budget template that our division has that kind of includes the fringe, the salary, the indirects, the directs, the direct costs and things like that. And it helps you to develop the budget. And the reason why that's important is because you, unlike the K where it's a fixed amount, you really need to think about salary support for you. You need to think about the salary support for other people, and all the participants, costs and everything like that. You need to make sure that you include money to analyze data, supplies, the travel. And what I would say is for this first R01 that you submit, you really want to try to stay under $500,000 per year. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is if you go in with anything above that, first of all, you got to get permission from the program officer. But the second big thing is, as coming out of a K, at least hearing review panels, they sometimes get a little bit nervous on new investigators. And so if you have a big budget that includes perhaps recruiting 1,500 people and your K award focused on 100 people, they're going to be wondering, can you really execute the project? So when I talk about salary support for yourself, that's another thing. You don't, for this first R01, you really don't want to try to go less than 30% because you have to remember how much protected time you have on your K award. And if you don't give yourself enough time to do this R01, it's going to be really hard to get everything you need to really do this well. So you want to think about your salary support, but then also the salary support of everybody else. And I think if you're thinking about your co-investigators, if you start to put people at less than 5% effort, it's hard to get their real commitments. So you have to think about what's a good amount of funding to do the project, but also get their commitment to help. And these are hard questions, so I would say, nothing that can be answered really in this time frame that we have, but it's something to continually talk to your mentors about and to help get somebody to help you with this initial budget, which is very different than the K award. So where to start with the R01? So of course, as I said, you got to start with an idea that answers an important question. And I think, it can't be a small step forward. It really needs to be something that is going to be significant. If you can focus on an area where you have expertise that helps, and that's where your bio sketch can come in. So that personal statement is very, very important to show that you've been working in this area for a very long time, that you're the right person to do this. In fact, you're the only person that can do this because of the preliminary data that you have from your K award. So you really want to be able to highlight those things. You want to come up with a project that can be completed in 4 to 5 years. If it's anything other than a clinical trial, most of the time NIH is funding those for 4 years now. If you're doing a clinical trial, sometimes you can do it for 5 years, but again, you want to really stay under 500,000 per year. And again, decide on the timeline and stick to it. And again, this is probably the most important thing, but you have to convince the study section that the project's worth doing and that you're the right person to do it. I'm just going to say a couple of things about the AIMS page, because I think this is also worth probably where you're going to spend the most effort. So of course, it's important to do the literature review. I usually say start with bullets, you know, of ideas that you want to put onto the AIMS page. Try to come up with 2 to 3 specific and achievable aims. You really don't want to have more than that. Any more than 3, and again, people start to question, you know, can you get the project done in the amount of time? Shop your ideas around. So this would, K Forum is a great idea to shop your ideas around, shop them to your mentors, basically anybody that will listen. You want to make those initial and closing paragraphs persuasive and compelling. I think one of the other things I would say is after you get the AIMS page written, give it to anybody to read. Give it to somebody that's not in medicine. They should be able to understand what you're trying to do. And if they don't, then you probably need to make it even more simple. So I would say try to get as many people from different areas to read it as possible. I also say when you're working on the AIMS page, start the sections in bullets of why you are either choosing things, because that will go into your approach, why you're not choosing things. That can go in your alternative things that you could have thought about. Think about contingency plans. So if you're thinking about, for instance, recruiting a patient population, you decided against a control group for this and this reason. Start taking those notes, because those are going to be important to help frame the other parts of the grant. And when you're kind of coming down to crunch time, sometimes you may forget about those things. So I always kind of start the other sections in bullet form as well. And then what I will say is what I've learned is if you can get the AIMS page right and you can spend most of your time here, actually the rest of the grant goes a lot easier. So while it kind of seems like you may want to get to the other parts of the grant, I think if you can get the AIMS page to be specific, achievable aims in a very clear fashion, the rest of the grant writes itself. This is one thing, is you want to make your proposal easy to read. That's probably the biggest thing. So trying sometimes less is more is a good idea. So here an example. Oops. So this was the AIMS page from actually my most recent grant that I submitted. And I wanted to just, yes, it has a lot of information on it, but I wanted to point out a couple of things. So one is reviewers can find the hypothesis. It's right, it's labeled here, it's underlined, they can see it. They can find the objectives. They can find the primary outcome. They know where the aims are. And one of the other tricks I learned was don't let the reviewers have to work too hard. So here's the impact of what each aim is going to accomplish. And I included that with each aim. Things are bolded, things stick out. That's probably makes it easier. So after, when it comes time to, when they have to talk about your grant, they can easily find things, especially when they're also writing their reviews. This is another example. This is actually from the NIH website, and you can see how here, you know, you would have to search for where the hypothesis is, where's their preliminary data, what's going on, you know. When you can help the reviewer to find things, it makes it a little bit easier. So again, just using tips and tricks is to help things stand out, I think is super helpful. This is for the research plan itself. Not sure. The one thing I would say here, whoops, is if you can, you want to highlight the knowledge gaps that exist. Because again, and where you're and what you're going to be able to answer. If you can, again, you want to use your own preliminary data. One of the things that I found super helpful is to try to have an overarching figure, and I'll give you an example of that on the next slide, I believe. Something that highlights what you're trying to do, because again, after reading a lot of pages, anything you can do to simplify will be easier. And again, you always want to have the expected outcomes of your study and any alternative approaches. And that's where those bullet points, as you're kind of working through things, can be helpful. So you want to avoid too much detail, too little detail, and too many abbreviations. So while abbreviations may be common in your field, a lot of the times the people reading it may not be in your field. So I try to limit abbreviations to very common things like BMI, and otherwise try to use just spell out the words. You really want to avoid any confusion in your grant. So you want to be clear on what's being done, who's doing it, or what data is being collected. You want to be consistent. So if you have to go back and change one part of the grant, you want to make sure that's changed everywhere. You want to make sure it's changed on the resources page, the environment page, everywhere, so that it's consistent. Sometimes you'll hear reviewers make comments like, it's unclear what they were trying to do. It's unclear who's going to be doing the project. It's unclear. And what you want to do is try to make it as clear as possible. You want to make sure you're not missing any letters of support. So if somebody's going to be doing something for you, you want to make sure you get that letter of support and it's not missing from the application. Of course, you want to avoid sloppiness. So one of the things I've seen is sometimes the references after you've compiled the whole thing get messed up. So you want to double check those. So if you're especially referencing your work or work that you've published, you want to make sure that that reference is exactly right, because if they go to check that reference and it's not correct, I can tell you that can be irritating for a reviewer. Try to use tables and figures and like an overarching figure. So this is kind of a couple of examples from, again, my most recent grant. So, we could have written all of this stuff out, but you can see how it's a little bit clearer once it goes into table form. So table 1 was the key study procedures that we were going to be doing. So what were we going to do? We were going to get consent, and we were going to do all these things. We were going to do a brain MRI, cognitive testing. It also included the time so people could get an idea of how long the study visit was going to be. We also wanted to show we had the clinic population, so we put that into table form. So again, you could put this all as text, but sometimes it helps. This was one of the figures we used from the Basic Science R01, and what you can see here is we were studying patients with type 2 diabetes versus those that were healthy, and you can see aim 1 was going to focus on transcytosis, aim 2 was proteoglycan binding, and aim 3 was the impact of diabetes. So it really didn't matter exactly what all these pictures show, but you can see that it was very clear what we were going to be looking at in these studies. And again, anything that you can do as an overarching figure or putting into tables is helpful. And as I said before, it's important to share and get feedback. So send it to all the members of the study team, especially if they can't review the whole thing. Send them the sections or the parts that you need help with, and have them reviewed in the context of the whole grant. If there's any mock reviews, take your grant to a mock review. You want feedback. You want anybody to look at the grant if you can. You want to send it to your mentors and any trusted colleagues. Sometimes they don't have time to review the whole grant, so you may send an aims page to one. You may send maybe significance and innovation to another. So use the opportunity to get feedback all you can. I would say be open and responsive to the feedback that you receive. So you're asking people for feedback, try to incorporate it. Of course, sometimes it can be hard to incorporate everything, but if somebody tells you I'm confused and don't understand what you're doing, it probably means that you gotta, try to rewrite it in a clearer way. Again, perfect that aims page. It's so super important because during study section, a lot of the times that's all they're looking at. Go back and strengthen your significance and innovation, clarify and simplify the approach. Put it away and you do it again. And that's probably the biggest reason why you need to start early in this process. What I would say, there's a whole bunch of other parts of an R01, and you don't want to forget these either. So I'm not going to read all of these, but again, these are all the different parts. You want to get started on the budget early. The human subjects parts of grants now, and especially for R1s, are very, very detailed. So you want to leave enough time to be able to do that. The one thing, again, I would say is for your biosketch, make sure you update that personal statement. It really needs to be why you are the right person to do this. You also want to update your publication list in your My Bibliography in PubMed. And the reason why that's important is now you're not able to list all your publications on your biosketch. So if you don't have that linked up and somebody clicks on your name and they can't find your publications, it's going to look like you haven't published anything. And the other thing I would say is make sure you're reading the instructions. There are always updates. So for instance, the NIH BioSketch has been updated. You want to make sure that you are paying attention to the correct versions. And again, you want to have things that are specific for your grant. So if you have a collaborator that's doing a BioSketch, you want to make sure that personal statements references your grant. I've seen grants that have BioSketches, and you can tell the project might be focused on diabetes, and instead actually this happened in the last grant section I reviewed for. There was something on organoids, and it was a T32 training grant. So it was clearly the BioSketch hadn't been updated for that grant. This is where you find your bibliography, and this is actually the link that you need to put on your NIH BioSketch. So you want to make sure that this is updated with your publications. And this is found through the NIH National Library of Medicine. The other key points I was just going to say is try not to put too much redundancy. So this is, for instance, the institution has a ton of grant boilerplates. If you can, you want to make things specific to your grant. So this is the facility and resources pages. I could have gone on and on and on about all the great things that UC and children's, but instead we included 3 pages in the last grant. And what it really focused on was the key points that were important for this grant: the institution, the research center, and the divisions that were involved with the grant. So I would say, sometimes you can see grants that have a ton of kind of extraneous information, and the more focused that you can make your grant and why, and the pages that are pertinent to your grant, I think it does help. So we took this facility and research boilerplate, and we took it down from about 20 pages to the things that we thought were most important and updated them for the specific grant. So multiple PI applications. So this and giving up your ESI status, there's no right answer, and I'd be happy to take more questions about this because I think it's kind of one of those things that is really hard. So I ended up doing this, and I actually have all 3 of the R01s that I am on are multiple PI applications. I think the first one that was the clinical trial that was with, it was a bariatric surgery grant. It made sense to have, investigators in diabetes and bariatric surgery together on that grant. The R01, the basic science one, I think part of when it got reviewed was, could I actually carry out that grant on my own? So my K award had been in the basic science realm. It expanded on that. But I think part of it was, there was some doubt. So when it went back in, my mentor actually ended up being the multiple PI on the application, and that worked out for us. So I think what it does show is that it has the opportunity to bring in additional expertise. It's actually able to, we paired it, so it was a senior person, and what I guess at that time I was considered a junior person. I think sometimes I still am a junior person. And then the other thing it does is it gets a little bit more investment in the project than a co-investigator, because somebody's actually a PI on the grant. But what that does is when you are a multiple PI, unless both individuals are early stage investigators, you actually give up your ESI status. And that can sometimes add 5 to 10 points for where the pay line will be. So I think it's a really challenging question, and I think it takes discussing with mentors and other people to decide if that's something you really want to do. And then the only other thing I would say is, while this is called the K to R transition, there are other grants that are equivalent through the Department of Defense and other foundations. So those are other things to also consider. But I also believe that once you've gotten a big grant through even one of those, you do give up your ESI status. So it's worth investigating that a little bit more. In all three of my situations, the 5 or 10 percentage points that I would have been allocated had I been an ESI in the end didn't matter, but that might not be true for everybody. And then I would just say, don't forget institutional support. There is a lot of it. So this is actually, I just pulled this whole list of pilot grants on your right from the Cincinnati Children's website, and some of them are listed, on the left as well, but there are tons and tons of opportunities for pilot or gap awards or just in time awards and things like that that you can use if the first application for the R01 is not successful. So take home points, plan early and stick to it. Publish if you can. Collect pilot data. Keep a running list of ideas. Don't forget those. Be strategic to your yes and no's. So definitely, you want to be collaborative, see if you can work on some other things, but at some point, if things are way off course, you definitely want to be able to say no. Utilize your mentors and others for feedback on your work. Present and represent multiple times in formal and informal settings. And then I would say submit, resubmit, and resubmit and be persistent. And I would say, just remember NIH wants K awardees to succeed, and so does Cincinnati Children's and the University of Cincinnati. So where you can, definitely use your colleagues, friends, and mentors to help you along the way.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shah, for this fabulous talk. It was wonderful, so much useful information, so many great take-homes for all of us. We can open it up for questions and answers now.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can actually see that.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Thanks so much. I always really respect people when you put those slides of all the grants that you apply to. And I think that just, gives us as junior investigators, a lot of reassurance that, if we stick to it and, get through the tough times that, that we'll be successful in the end. So thank you for doing that. My question is related to about your initial submissions with your K and then your R01. Were the feedback that you got when they came back from committees, is it what you expected and what your mentors' concerns were? And if not, do you have any advice about, do you have the appropriate people reviewing grants and serving on career development committees? And do you have any advice for, seeking outside opinions to make sure that, when you do submit that you're in the best, position possible? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. So I will tell you, the times I submitted, my mentors were like, this is great work. It's going to get funded, So, looking back, I think, so both with the BRAIN grant and with the initial basic science R01, I would say, we were all kind of shocked, but reading the reviews from the reviewers, I could see where they were going. So for the BRAIN one specifically, I think they thought we didn't have enough preliminary data for sure. They thought that our control, because we only had enough money for a pilot study in youth with type 2 diabetes, we used a convenience control group, and they really didn't think that was valid. So I think them coming back, and even when we resubmitted, we had a control group, but I think again, there were some things that were probably could have been better. So I think that was valid and legit. I think with the R01 that went off the basic science thing, I think they didn't think it was significant enough. Like they thought it was incremental from my K. it wasn't kind of going to be, it wasn't going to change, it wasn't going to shift the pathway, you know, it wasn't going to shift or create momentum in the field. It wasn't going to be that significant. And when I read the reviews the first time, I think they were trying to say that, but I think they were, it went not discussed. So sometimes when you get an application that's not discussed, you can't read between the lines, and the program officer can't help. I think by the time it was scored the second time, the program officer kind of gave me the feedback, which was they just didn't think it was significant enough. And so that's why we kind of took that and then put that away and actually went in a whole new direction the third time we submitted that. So I did have to leave that, and that was kind of hard because that's what my K had been, you know, had been the foundation of. And I thought, well, they really liked it for the K. Why don't they like it now? But I think that was part of it, was it needed to be a shift, you know. And so it's still related to diabetes, it's still related to cardiovascular disease, but it's taken a new approach on it. But yeah, I would say no, I don't think anybody really anticipated it either. So I think it's just how the study section goes. And maybe I ran into a streak of luck now. I don't know, you know. That's why I also think persistence is important.
Thanks a lot.
Other questions?
Uh, Hi, Amy. Thank you for this. Thank you for the wonderful talk. So, and congratulations on this success. Yeah, it's amazing. So, my question was, what's a good number of publications? I understand quality and quantity, but what's a good number if you have to talk about numbers?
That's hard. I think so obviously they're looking at what you've done on your K. So I think anything you can publish off of that work is good. I think you know, they don't say, you know, nobody gave me a specific number, but they would always say has a great publication record, you know. And so I think if you can have, I think by the time I went in for the R1 that had been off my K work, I had, you know, probably had 3 publications off of the primary science, but a couple, I would say also 3 or 4 review articles or other types of articles. Because I was able to be involved with a couple of the other study groups that already had data collected, I had numerous publications off of that. The reason I think that helped was because, again, it was showing that I had expertise in the area of diabetes, right? So I was working with larger study groups and able to publish off of that. So I honestly don't have a great answer. I mean, maybe Jessica has an answer to this, but I don't know a specific number. I mean, the more the better, you know. Jessica, do you have any insight on what people are thinking when they're saying numbers?
I don't know that I have better insight than you do. You know, at least a few. I think that the keys are what you had mentioned some of these. So for example, publishing off of your K, publishing in the area in which you're writing your R award, having first author publications in those areas to show that you're leading the work so that you have potential for an independent research career. And then another thing is publishing with your collaborators on the R01. It can be really helpful to demonstrate that you have established collaborations with them. If you submit an R01 and you have a few collaborators and you've never done work with them before, you don't demonstrate kind of that track record. So I think as opposed to like the absolute number, reviewers are looking at those other aspects of publication. And
That's a
Jason
great
may have
point.
some additional insights on publications.
Sorry, I was just going to say I totally agree with what you're saying. I don't think there's an absolute number, but I will say there are bean counters that are reviewers, and I'm one of them. I'm one of those people that actually counts publications. I hate to admit it. I hate it because I don't want to be at the other end of that, but I do. And so I think Amy gave you some great examples of, you know, things that you want to think about, like every publication matters. And they may get weighted differently, but a review article is still a publication. An editorial is still a publication. yes, I totally agree that you'd like to be first author or last author. Doesn't always happen that way. But some of the main things that I see are, I mean, Amy pointed out that get missed is if in the new NIH biosketches particularly, there is no room to list every publication, right? So you must use that link. And I would say 50% of the time that I click on that link, and I click on it every single time for everybody's CV, it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, boo for you, because you're smart enough to make it work, and you need to check it and make sure it works.
Yeah.
The other thing is, too, I mean, this seems silly, but you can't actually use a non-government website for that. It's very, the NIH is very strict on what they want to use. So you essentially have to use My Bibliography, NCBI, that sort of thing. You can't just have it linked to your public website or something like that. But just make sure it's up to date, because you're all publishing, you're all very successful. Think about if something got accepted a month ago or 2 months ago, it might have come out online and should be included in your bibliography. But your bibliography, you have to do the updating on. It doesn't just
That's what I was gonna
automatically
say,
update
yeah.
itself.
I actually went in when I was preparing this talk and updated mine, because it doesn't update automatically. So you need to add your publications to that. That's another important thing. Just because if you put your name in PubMed, it will pull them all up, doesn't mean it's going to be linked to that My Bibliography.
Hey, Jason, how does it compare like the basic scientist, you know what I mean, versus the clinicians? Because there is a difference, right? Whereas, some people were working a lot clinically before they got a K, their publications may be different when you compare to a PhD. Do the committees care about that a lot, or is it really just,
no, because you're asking a great question, and there are differences, but I think it's less to do with an MD versus a PhD or a translation in clinical versus basic science, and more to do with your field. So as an example, as a virologist, my PhD students, by the program requirements, are required to do one publication. Every one of my students will have 5 to 6 publications when they finish, because my field is, I don't want to say it's easier, but it's different than Amy's, where she's doing type 2 diabetes is hell on wheels. And those are really long, complicated studies, animal studies, human studies that last a long time, versus I can get a publication out of a new variant of a virus. And so some of the reviewers understand that nuance and some don't. But I think what helps is to see that you want to avoid is, well, if you're going to apply for a K and you've only published 1 or 2 publications, then people can say, are you really that interested, or do you really have that time? So think about the extreme examples and just try to avoid them, I guess, is really my thought.
Thank you so much, Jason, for those additional insights. And Amy, thank you so much for a terrific talk. Thanks to all of you for joining us.